Welcome to Noteflight for the Music Theory Classroom. I am Jena Root, broadcasting from Ohio, and we also have John from Noteflight to handle some of your questions at the end. And I want to thank you all for attending tonight, and also send out many thanks to John and the Noteflight team for making this possible. I want to start with a brief overview of what we'll be working with tonight. I am first going to talk about working in the Noteflight Learn environment. And Noteflight Learn is a service where you can set up your own website for your classes, and you are the admin of that web space. So you can control what students are in your class, you can add and remove students, you can reset their login information, and you can see their scores. After I talk about that, I'm going to go through some sample activities that are going to cover a wide range of topics from throughout the music theory core. I teach college music theory, but I want to emphasize that all of these activities can be tailored for any level, college or high school or whatever level you are teaching, simply by changing the content. So we will talk about some fundamentals activities, counterpoint, chord analysis, some more advanced score notation, and then finally wrap up with some ear training exercises and some vocal and instrumental improvisation. So as I said, Noteflight Learn is a service where you can create your very own class website within the Noteflight software. And if you want to find out more about how Learn works, you can go to www.noteflight.com/learn. I'm going to bring up a window with the Noteflight Learn environment just to show you how it works. If you are already a Noteflight user, this should look very familiar to you, this homepage area. Notice up here that I have the name of my school, and the green instead of the orange shows me that I am on my school website and not my Noteflight.com site. Within the Learn website, I can create groups that represent each of my classes. So here are 3 groups that I've created. 2 of them are classes that I just got done teaching this fall semester, 2016. I had a Grad Analysis 1 class for my graduate students, Materials of Music, which is a fundamentals class, and then a class that I created just for this webinar called the Rock and Roll Afterlife. So let's see who's in that class. If I go to that class, I can see all of the scores that are shared with the class and the class members. So that looks like a pretty strong class to me. I can add students and edit this list, and students can be in more than one class. So I'm going to show you now how to set up an activity template, which is basically just an assignment that you can share with your students. Here is a basic scale composition exercise that I use with my fundamentals class. In this assignment, the students are to create a major scale using the starting and ending notes that I give for each question. In addition, they are to compose a rhythm that fits the given meter and the given starting and ending notes. So the student might compose a B-flat major scale that looks like B-flat, C, D, all in quarter notes, or they could compose C as a dotted quarter note and D as an 8th note, and then continue up the scale, E-flat, and now we have to get, within 3 beats, we have to get up to B-flat. And of course the student can play everything back and hear their work. And you can select any measure to start in that measure. Now, to create this as an assignment, we'll go to the Connect panel. And here we have some sharing options. So I have shared this score with the group Rock and Roll Afterlife, and I could add classes to this if I wanted to. And this is very important. I have made the score an activity template so that when each member of the class opens it, they will get their own copy into which they can do their own work, and it will be linked back to my score. So if I were to save this and make an actual assignment, of course, I would want to take out what I just gave you and save it. Then when the students go in and complete the assignment, their copy will be linked back to this score. So I'm going to go up here and view template copies, and I can see who has done their homework. So it looks like 3 of my students have done their homework. And we have Janice Joplin, George Harrison, and Frank Zappa. Let's see what Frank did. Okay, so here is Mr. Zappa's assignment, and in typical form, he's written something very Zappa-esque, quintuplet over the 3/4 measure. So I can go in, and I have full edit powers over the score. So I can go in and I can make comments on this. I can color the measure red, and I can also put in little annotations. And my name will be attached to the annotation, so that if he wanted to respond to me, his annotation would have his name attached as well. And then when he goes in and opens this assignment, he can simply click on that and see my comments. So that is how an activity template works. That's how you set it up for your students. And I'm going to spend the rest of our time together talking about different assignments that you can create that really take advantage of some of the more robust features of Noteflight. The next assignment is also a music fundamentals assignment, and this one deals with rhythm. In this assignment, the student is given a few bars of 6/8, and they are to correct the beaming for 6/8. You see everything here is flagged, and that's not correct. So the student has to beam the notes in dotted quarter note groups, 2 groups per measure. And so the student can click on a note, and then if we go up here to the rhythm menu, there are options to make a note the start of a beam or the continuation of a beam. So I can start a beam on this first note. I can use the arrow keys to move among notes, and I can connect beams very easily. I can also go to the last note and make it the continuation of a beam. And I can do that for the entire measure if I want to. And you'll notice that in this menu, in this beaming menu, there are also shortcut keys. So if I want to start a beam, I can use the right-hand curly brace as a keyboard shortcut. And then I can just move among the different notes and use the keyboard shortcuts when I need them. A more advanced example of the same concept would be to beam notes together where you have a 16-based compound meter. So if we've advanced in our class by a week or so, my students might see an assignment like this. Here are 3 songs that I've notated in compound meter where the beat division is a 16th note, so the big beat is a dotted 8th note. Now because there are so many notes in the measure, and there are 16th notes and 32nd notes, it would be very cluttered and very crowded to notate this with separate flags. So what I've done instead is beamed the entire measure together, and the student has to break the beam at the correct spot. So here in our first number, Home on the Range, the first measure here in blue has already been completed for the student. So the student can go in using that same menu And right now, this note is the continuation of a beam, and it should not be. So I can uncheck that, and now I have correct beaming for this measure. I can do the same thing in the following measure. And since this exercise has both rhythm and pitches, I highly and strongly encourage the student to listen, especially for this first one where it's a song they know, and they can hear the beat groupings. So I'm going to start in our pickup measure and just play back a little bit of this. Here's what the student would hear. 2, 1, and a 2, and a 1, 2, 1, 2. And hopefully that would give them a sense of where the beams should be broken and how the measure should be divided. A slightly more complicated example is number 2 in 9/16. And even though the student might not know this piece, they could listen and perhaps get context clues about the rhythm. Here we have a third down and a third up, and then another pattern that is the same. So when they listen to this, and again, you can select any measure and start the playback there. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's worth pointing out as well that the student can adjust the tempo. They can slow it down if they want to hear it played more slowly. And finally, just for fun, I've included a Bach example here. This is an actual excerpt from the Well-Tempered Clavier in 12/16. And they can hear both parts, and they have to beam both parts correctly. So that's just an example of some creative things that you can do with rhythm in Noteflight. Moving on, I'm going to talk a little bit about counterpoint now. And when I have my students do counterpoint, before they actually write counterpoint, I like to have them listen and critique existing counterpoints. And that's what this next assignment is about. I call this Rate the Counterpoint. In this assignment, the students are given 3 different counterpoints written over the same cantus firmus, and they have to rate them from best to worst. So 1 is very, very good. The second is correct but not very good, and the third one is just awful and has all kinds of errors in it. So this first set has already been done. This is something that we would have completed in class, and I include as a sample for the students. And then on the subsequent pages, the students will see exercises for them to complete, where the cantus firmus is in black notes, and then the counterpoint, in this case it's below, is in a color on the staff. And just for fun, we also have to include some alto clef because the students love it so much. So the first thing the students would do in an assignment like this is they would have to identify all of the intervals between the voices. So if the student were completing this assignment, they could select a note and they would use the lyrics tool, which is up here in the text menu. And you see there's a shortcut key for that, Control L. So if I type Control L, a cursor appears under the note and I can say that this is an octave. And then I can use the space bar simply to advance through all of the notes. So here's a third, and another third, and it looks like another third and a fourth. That might be a problem there. So when the students actually enter the intervals, they can see things like illegal fourths, or if they type 5 twice in a row, they can see parallel fifths. So coming back up to the sample, here's one that's already completed. The intervals have been entered, and the first thing the student has to do is listen to the counterpoints. the third one. Ah, that's lovely. Now I want to point out that I built in a slight pause between each counterpoint so they don't play back to back. And I did that by adding an extra measure at the end of the system, putting a solid bar line before it, and then making the rests invisible. You can actually see a ghost of the rest there. And the ability to make things invisible is up here in the color menu. Invisibility is just another color. And that is a premium feature and also a learned feature. So let's take a look at these counterpoints. So we have the intervals, and then the student can add annotations to say what's wrong with the counterpoint. 1B is fine. That's a great answer for that cantus firmus. 1A we rated a 2, meaning it's mostly correct, but just not very good. So let's look at the annotations. Well, first one says this entire line is really lame and boring. And really it doesn't move around very much. Our second comment is that we have an octave moving to a fifth, and that sounds kind of hollow. And I want to remind you that this is not me talking to my students, but my students talking to the mysterious person who wrote these counterpoints. So the student might say something like, there's no unique high point, and I think this counterpoint is really dumb. And then down here in counterpoint number 3, we have all kinds of problems. There's an augmented fourth, and there's parallel fifths. So we can point all those things out. So this is not only a fourth, which is dissonant, but it's an augmented fourth, which is extra dissonant. Over here, we have similar motion to a fifth, which is a no-go in counterpoint. And then parallel fifths twice in a row. And finally, we don't even end it right. We don't end on T-do, and whoever wrote this is totally going to fail. For some reason, the students really enjoy doing this. So, moving on. We'll move a little further forward in the theory curriculum now. The next couple of exercises we might use in a second or third semester harmony class. The first is basically a chord analysis, and I'm going to use a Scott Joplin example for this. This is from the Chrysanthemum. And here I've made the non-chord tones light blue so that the student knows to ignore them. You could also tell the student to identify them by type. So the student could click on a note, add a text annotation, and say something like, this is a passing tone. So they might add passing tone. And we can use the arrow keys to move text out of the way as needed to keep things from colliding with one another. We might add a neighbor tone over here. And then what's really neat about this is the chord analysis feature. Now, as an instructor, you can put a blank in as a chord symbol, and when the student goes in to add their analysis, all they have to do is double-click on the blank you've added, and it turns into a cursor. They don't have to delete the blank or anything. They just double-click and add the chord symbol. So when we add the chord symbol, we can type Roman numeral 1 and 6 for the inversion, and Noteflight knows that this is a chord, so they automatically superscript the 6. Moving forward, again, we just double-click and enter the chord symbol. We can do something a little more fancy. This is a 5, 7 of 2, so I can add 5, 7, / Roman numeral 2. And Noteflight will recognize that as a secondary function chord. It's also worth pointing out that when you first enter a chord, Noteflight will default to putting it above the staff because that's where guitar chords normally go. But once you drag something down below the staff, where you can use your arrow keys to move it around, Noteflight will remember where you put it, and all of your subsequent chords, it will align with the initial chord. Now this is a very interesting chord here. It is also a 5/7 of 2, but it is in 4/2 inversion because the 7th is in the bass. So to render that, we simply type 5, 4/2 for the 4/2 inversion, / Roman numeral 2, and Noteflight will place the 4 above the 2 because, again, it knows that these are chords. Over here we have a very interesting chord, and I've asked my students a question to talk about what's special about this chord. So all the theorists in the audience will know that this is a German augmented sixth chord. And if we don't like where that's placed, we can select it and use the arrow keys to move it around to center it a little more. Now, if you studied out of piston, you might know that this is called a Swiss augmented sixth chord because it occurs in a major key. So let's say that that's what we want our students to tell us. The student can click on a note, they can add an annotation of their own, and answer the question by saying something like, this is it uses sharp 2 in major keys instead of flat 3, or something like that. And then you can go in and click on that annotation and see your student's hopefully brilliant answer to your question. Now, a slight variation on this score is that if you don't want to make your students listen to the electronic playback inside the browser, you can add an external synced audio file. So this is exactly the same analysis assignment, except that over here in the Connect panel, I've added an actual recording of a performance of this excerpt. And what will happen when I play this is that the recording will start just a little bit before the notated score that you see on the screen here. And you'll see the scroll bar at the beginning, and the scroll bar will wait until the recording has gotten to this point, and then it will move. Now, this is something that I've set up. When I brought in the audio file, I was able to sync the measures to the recording. And I'm not going to show you how to do exactly that right now because it's explained in much detail in the user guide. I just want to show you that it's possible. Let's have a listen. Now, once we have the capability to bring in an audio file, that's a real game changer because now you can have something notated on the staff that is not part of the audio file. So this could become a transcription exercise if we were to delete measures and say, make the student transcribe all or part of the right hand. So let's say we wanted the student to transcribe those two measures of the right hand, including that German augmented sixth chord. Then we could do something like this. And we are not playing back right now. That might be due to some funny business with the webinar, but it does work. So we will move on. And we're going to move higher up in the music theory food chain here to a graduate course that I taught this past semester. And we're going to look at an annotated score by one of my favorite composers, Clara Schumann. This is the third movement from the Clara Schumann trio. And we studied this in class and did a group analysis. And then I posted an annotated score as a study guide for the midterm. And so it does take some time to bring in the actual score. If you have a score from another program, you can convert it to XML and bring it in that way, and that works very, very well. And that's what I did here. And you can see that I've used colors here to annotate and identify all of the non-chord tones. We have a chord analysis underneath, and then I can also use annotations to explain what's going on harmonically. So we have an interesting thing happening here with a fully diminished seventh chord of 6, but we never hear the actual 6th chord. There's a tonicization of E minor without an E minor chord. And so that could throw off a student, but then I have an annotation here that sort of guides them gently in the right direction. So I say that the next 3 chords tonicize the key of E minor, which is the submediant, even though we don't hear an actual submediant chord. Then I go on to say that this could be a foreshadowing of the B section of this piece, which is, in fact, in E minor. Moving forward, a little bit later, we have an ascending stepwise progression here that goes through the keys of A minor and B minor. And so it's really easy to just use different colors to represent those keys. And then through another fully diminished 7th chord, we come back to the home key of G major before the section closes out. And this was the same chord that we heard earlier. I believe it was in measure 5. And I put in some annotations here. The students see all these accidentals, and they sometimes freak out a little bit, so they need some guidance. So here's an annotation. By the way, you can move these around the screen. And I say this chord looks like a D sharp fully diminished 7th chord, D sharp, F sharp, A, C. And so you might think it's tonicizing 6 again, but, and I keep them in suspense with the next annotation, but here, it makes more sense to interpret the root as F sharp, A, C, E flat. The chord becomes 7 diminished 6, 5 in the home key of G major with F sharp as the root. And then I guide them to look at the dominant prolongation that we have just after that. And also you can point out something along the lines of the violin changing from D sharp to E flat, the same note and harmonically, but functioning different within the chord. And finally, speaking of fully diminished 7th chords, here is an exercise that I've assigned for many, many years, and it never went quite so well until I started integrating Noteflight. And that's because I think for the student to really understand enharmonicism fully, first of all, they need to hear what's going on, and second of all, they need to see it on a keyboard. So in this exercise, I've completed the first 2 questions, and I also made a video screencast of myself completing the first 2 questions in Noteflight so that they have a better understanding of what I'm actually asking them to do. So for a moment, I'm going to look at number 3, which is the first question that's not actually completed. Here we have an A fully diminished 7th chord in 4/2 position. The 7th is on the bottom. What the student has to do is find the root of this chord, and then they change it to any color that they want. They just have to color in the root of the chord, so I know that they know that it's the root. Then they will identify the position and the key. So this is an A chord in 4/2 position, and as a leading tone chord, it would be 7 diminished 4/2 in the key of B flat. And notice when I enter this chord, Noteflight will change that lowercase b to a flat. And it just makes it all look right. And again, you can move it around. Then they have to do the same for every possible spelling of this fully diminished 7th chord. So if we look up here to the chords that I've already completed, in the first one we see that C sharp is the root, so it's 7 fully diminished 7 in the key of D. Then E is the root, so it's 7/4/2 in F. G is the root, making it 7/4/3 of A flat. And finally, A sharp is the root, making it 7 diminished 6, 5 in the key of B. And once the student has done all this, the first thing they can do to check their work, it's very simple, is they can play it back. So we can hear this And they can make sure that all of these fully diminished seventh chords sound the same. And if it sounds like a freight train is coming down your hall, you probably did the example correctly. In addition to that, redundancy is great when you're checking your homework, so I also encourage the students to use the on-screen keyboard. And we can bring that up. Now, any measure that is selected, the pitches will show up on the piano keyboard. And since we're dealing with enharmonicism, all the student needs to do is scroll through the measures and make sure that those piano keys don't move. And they don't move, that means we did it right. So let's go on to number 2, which is a different chord. So that's our D sharp chord. And again, the piano keys should not change. And that's how they know they've done the example correctly. A couple other things here. Noteflight is very flexible with formatting. So I've used double bar lines to separate my questions. I've formatted it for 8 measures on a line. So when you see this arrow here, that comes from using the Enter key. I can designate any measure as the end of a system simply by hitting Enter. And that measure is now designated as a line break. And I just hit Enter again to undo that. You can also have the student type their name in the composer field so that when you go back into that activity template list and you open a student's work, you can right away see who did the work. And finally, we're going to move on to my absolute favorite subject to teach, and that is ear training. I actually started using Noteflight in the ear training classroom first before anything else. Because it's a very powerful tool for dictation practice and assessment. So the exercise I'm about to show you is melodic dictation, but you can use this for rhythmic dictation, harmonic dictation, or any kind of dictation that you want. So this is what the student will see. And this is a melodic dictation exercise. I use this in my Theory 3 and sometimes my Theory 4 classes. It is a short melody with chromatic leaps. I'm going to play the whole thing from the beginning so that you can hear what the student hears. Notice that Noteflight plays the entire repeat structure, including the first and second endings. It will also play DS and DC markings, and it will play a coda system. It knows. It's very smart that way. So this is what the student hears. The tonic arpeggio, to establish the key, I put in hidden measures here, and the same thing with the count-off. It's in a hidden measure. So the student can select any measure and start playback there. Now remember, this is a practice exercise, so the student does have access to the answers. So if the student doesn't need to hear the arpeggio, they can start here for the count-off. Or if they already have a sense of the pulse, they can simply start where the melody begins. When the student is ready to see the answers are in hidden staves that they can access in the Instruments panel. And you can see I've put this in an instruction prompt here. So these instruments, I think the answer staff was originally a piano instrument, and the blank staff, I think, was also a piano staff, and the rhythm was a non-pitched percussion staff. So you can set up these instruments and then name them whatever you want. I think the rhythm staff was originally originally called cowbell or something like that. In any case, when the student opens this panel, you'll see that there are check boxes here, and the student can select whatever they want to see. The blank is where they put their answer, and they can enter their notes here until they're ready to see the answer. And then when they're ready, if they just want to see the rhythm, to see if they're on the right track, they can select rhythm, and that'll show just the rhythm staff. And if they want to see the whole answer, they can do it by selecting the answer staff. And they can toggle any of these on and off as they like. So now, I'll zoom this out so you can see it a little better. So now the student can see the full answer, can have playback of the full answer, can compare it to their own answer. And I use notes on the staff and solfege in my classes, so I put the solfege in as lyrics. Finally, I want to show you the mixer panel, where you can control the difference between what the student sees and what the student hears. So in this instance, I have silenced the staff where the student enters his or her notes so that it doesn't play back over the original melody. But if the student wanted to hear their own answer, what they've entered, if they didn't get it right, they could toggle these and hear their answer as compared to the original. Hopefully just one at a time. Although, if they really wanted to, they could play them back at the same time, like Charles Ives or something. If you wanted to tailor an exercise like this for a quiz or an assessment, so that the student could not see the answers, you could, again, add that external audio file synced to this score. Or you could even record yourself playing the exercise into Noteflight. And I'm going to talk more about recording in just a moment. But it's very easy to just record yourself on a track, and then there is no notated score that the student could find. And it would be an actual quiz because they couldn't see the answer. Moving on, one of my favorite exercises in ear training class is improvisation. My students and I have a lot of fun with this. And I really start improvisation from semester 1. This is actually an exercise that I use in my Musicianship 1 class. At this point, we have learned 1, 4, and 5 chords. And I give them the chord progression to Amazing Grace in a very simple harmonization, harmonized just with 1, 4, and 5. And I give them just the chords on the staff, and I give them quarter notes in the bass to act as a pulse so that they can keep themselves on track. On the top staff, I have a simple rhythm written out with the solfege of each chord. And up until now, I've been using this as sort of a practice karaoke track, where they can play this back and practice weaving a path through the solfege to make an improvised line. So if the student is not really sure about this, or they're not terribly comfortable with improvisation, they can simply do one note per measure. Do for 3 beats, mi for 3 beats, fa for 3 beats, following the solfege. Then once they get a little more comfortable with it, they might make a melody with half notes and quarter notes. Do, mi, so, la, fa, so. And for students that want a bit more of a challenge, they can add neighbor and passing tones, again by weaving a path through the chords and adding notes that aren't there. So they might go do, re, mi, so, la, so, fa, so. So traditionally I have used this as a practice track, but recently Noteflight added the ability to record yourself right into the web browser. This is a premium feature, and again, all of the premium features are available in Learn, so if you have a Learn account, your students could do this with their own activity template, and you could go in and listen. Here's what that sounds like. Okay. When I start, Noteflight is going to give me a count off, and it will also give me a click track, which I can keep or turn off. And I can have the option to mute the selected part while it's recording, and that's what I want to do. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, sol, mi, do, re, mi, re, do, ti. And that's enough of that. I'm going to leave you at the half cadence there. Now we'll see in our tracks that we can opt to play the Noteflight track, or we can opt to play the track that I just recorded. And if the student doesn't like what they did, they can delete it right away. And then the instructor can go in and hear it. Oops. And we do need to go back to the beginning for that. You'll hear a little reverb here from my speakers. That's definitely enough of that. Okay, so this is just one of the things that you can do with improvisation. The student can do this on their voice, they can do it on their instrument. When they practice, they can change the key and they can change the tempo as needed. If this key isn't good for a transposing instrument, or maybe a violin player doesn't like this key, they can change the key. And of course, with voice range, you can put the key wherever you need to put it. Finally, I'm going to talk about one more very simple thing that you can do with ear training and dictation. And once again, this goes back to the idea that if you import an audio file or record an audio file directly into the score, you can have a notated score that does not match what the student is hearing. And that's the whole point here. We can do error detection. So here's a very simple two-measure, two-part counterpoint where the notated score has two mistakes. Let's hear that one more time. I should also add that if you do not want the scrub bar to be moving across the score, you can set it so that the bar just stays at the beginning, if it's, for example, a rhythmic dictation or something like that. So if you were listening carefully, you might have heard that the C sharp is incorrect. So the student can go in and color that red. And also the B in the bass should be a C sharp. So the student can go in and mark that as well. So this is just the beginning of some things that I've been using Noteflight for, and I think that the most interesting thing about the program for me is that it really leaves a lot of room and flexibility for teachers to create their own exercises and really work within their own pedagogy. It is not a program that will tell you you have to teach something a certain way. It's not limited in that way. And I like that the program trusts me as an educator to do the things that I think are best for my students. So with that, I want to thank you all for watching and listening tonight, and we will open up the floor for questions.